Oké. Hallo allemaal. Het is super warm. Echt super fijn dat jullie allemaal lekkere ijsjes hebben. Dus laten we beginnen with the interview with the one and only Victor Dixen. All right. So first off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, your amazing outfit?
Well, I'm a vampire. I wanted to tell that today. No, I am Franco-Danish. My mother is French. My father is Danish. I grew up in France and actually in Versailles. So the inspiration for Vampyria really comes from my youth. When I was in high school, I used to go to the castle. The high school was just next to the castle. So it was a perfect setting to read and to dream. So I wanted to write on Versailles for a very long time. And these books I was reading by the canal in Versailles when I was a teenager, they were vampire books, actually. But it was before the Beatles, before Twilight. It did not exist. So maybe, well, I like it. I like Twilight, but I even prefer Gothic literature. And that's what I read when I was a teenager. I'm thinking of Dracula by Bram Stoker, of course, but also Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. Some of you here have read Carmilla? Yes, a few. Yeah, we had a book club a bit earlier today, and I asked the same question because Carmilla is a bit less known than Dracula, but it's exquisite. If you can read it, you will enjoy it. And of course, I also read Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. So this is the type of vampire I wanted to put in my story. These two desires, Versailles on one side, vampires on the other, met, and that's how Vampyria was created. Around one character, Louis XIV, and one date, 1715. This was in the quiz.
It was, yes.
So do you remember what is 1715 from the quiz? Yeah, the year he died. That's the official story. But the reality, we know here in this room, we all know the reality. He never died. He actually was transmuted into a vampire in 1715. The Sun King became the King of Shadows. And I imagine that he stayed on the throne forever until today, in the 21st century. Louis XIV is still reigning not only over France, but also Europe and the rest of the world.
Yes, so that's what Vampyria is a bit about. So what inspired you specifically to write about King Louis XIV, the Sun King?
So going to the castle so often, I was of course interested by its creator. At the beginning of the reign of Louis XIV, there was only a swamp in Versailles. There was nothing. And he had this dream of creating a castle so wonderful it would mesmerize the rest of the world. So at the end of the reign, there was this castle, this dream of stone. I had the opportunity to live in several countries. I've lived in Asia, in Singapore, in the US, in Ireland. Everywhere I've been in the world, when I say the word Versailles, I can see sparkle in people's eyes. There is all imagination linked to Versailles. As if Versailles went through the centuries like a vampire, keeping the same fascination power. So I wanted to write on this and to write on Louis XIV, who created Versailles. So I read a lot of biographies. So many biographies, like thousands, have been written because he used to put on a show for his life. Every day, he had the whole court attending his awakening by his bed. Each of his meals, the whole court was attending. He was like the social influencer of the days, like he invented, he was the Kim Kardashian of the days. And but at the same time, when you read the diaries of the courtiers, they all say that it was impossible to know what he was thinking because he always had the same face. He was very mysterious. So I think I wrote this book also to understand who was Louis XIV, what were his motivations, and then that's how it started.
Yeah, I have read it already, and it's so unique, and I really love the twist and the take that it's history, but then it sort of like splits off into fantasy, and it's so cool. So, yeah. Are any other characters inspired by real-life people?
Well, there are several historical characters you will meet in Vampyria. This, if we have to define the genre of the story, it's historical fantasy, it's dark fantasy, but more specifically, it is Uchronia, or alternate history, as they say in English. Are you familiar with this genre? Uchronia? Yeah. It's when we take the official history and then there is an event that happens differently. And then the course of history is changed forever. So many alternate histories were written about World War II. For instance, The Man in the High Castle. I don't know if some of you have read it by Philip K. Dick or seen the series. It's a very good read. My diverging event is 1715, so the death of Louis XIV. And so I kept a lot of characters from history. Some of them, they died, but some of them got transmutated into vampires, and you will find them in the series with a different face, yeah.
That's so amazing. Okay, so how much research did you need to do for Vampyria?
Quite a lot, but the good thing, well, for all my books, usually I do a lot of research. When I write science fiction, it's more scientific, technical research, because I really want it to read true. And when it's historical fantasy, it's historical research. By the way, some of you here, have you read Phobos, my science fiction series? Yeah, a few of them. That's like the historical canal, like since the beginning. Hi. So yeah, for Vampyria, I did historical research, but since I was interested in Versailles for a long time, I had already read a lot. So I did some additional reading, but most of the knowledge was already there.
Amazing, amazing. So what comes first for you, the plot or the characters?
I am a plotter, you know. Yeah, there are two. They say there are two kinds of writers: the one that plot everything, and the ones that don't plot and just get carried away sentence after sentence. For instance, Stephen King, he says he never plots, and he's just carried away one idea after the other one. The reality is that most writers, we are never entirely plotters or non-plotters. We are in between. It's a spectrum. And we can also evolve during our career between the two poles. And also we can adapt it depending on the story you want to tell. But as a general rule, I am more a plotter. I try really to work on my story like clockwork, you know, so that's the suspense, the thriller aspect. I want the reader to turn the pages and to forget the time and maybe
That's
to do a sleepless night.
That's also definitely what happened to me while reading Vampyria, yes.
And also the world building. I spend months building my world before writing. But then the characters is totally different. It's the most instinctive and intuitive parts of a story. They come to me in my imagination fully fleshed. And I get to know them by writing, actually. So, and sometimes they totally explode my plot. Everything I had spent months to build, this can be changed by the characters because they escape my control, they make their own decisions. And a lot of writers, they say that, you know, not only in fantasy, but in all genres, that the characters, they become alive when you write. So there is a bit of a tension, a danger. You know, you ask yourself, am I going to be able to finish the story? Because it's not taking the track I had planned. And of all the characters I've created, ever, the one who escaped me most is the heroine of Vampyria, Jeanne. She's totally crazy. You're going to see that reading the book. She did things I had never anticipated. So I was asking myself, she's not going to do that. But she would do it, and she would do even worse. So there was one stage in the novel, I was not even sure I could finish it because of everything she did. But I like her so much for that.
That's amazing. Speaking of Jeanne, the main character, and how she's kind of feisty and also a bit morally grey, would you two get along in real life or not?
Well, that all depends on the circumstances. So I don't want to spoil the book because most of you, you've not read it. You have to know and because you will discover that in the very first chapters and even the very first lines, so I can tell it now. All family is going to be slaughtered in the first pages by the king's soldiers, so by the king of shadows, Louis XIV soldier. She is a survivor. She lives in a very dangerous world. And in order to survive in this world, you must do things that sometimes are a bit morally dubious. And she is also this type of character who acts first, think after, or maybe don't think at all. So I think if she was my friend, I would do my utmost not to make her angry, so that to keep her very happy. And if we were in a survival mode, like in a zombie apocalypse, she's a very good friend to have. Yeah.
Yes, because she will go there.
Yeah.
She will do it.
She'll do it. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So, what was the part of the book that you have the hardest time writing? Like, what was the most difficult part?
It was Jeanne. Honestly, that's for the reason I was telling you. Like the world building, it was very intuitive for me because I love Versailles so much. I love history so much, and also vampires. So I took all the aspects of history and French society of the time, and I used the vampiric filter. For instance, the society in France was organized by orders in the feudality. So you had the nobility at the top, clericals, and then the peasants. I kept the same structure, but I put another layer on top, high nobility, the vampires. So of course, like the mortal vampire, the mortal courtiers, the mortal nobles, their only wish is to be transmutated at the court. So they try to be to get the privilege of the king. And at the bottom of the pyramid is the peasants, like 90% of the population. There was this tax in ancient France called the dîme, which comes from Latin decima, which means 1/10, meaning that peasants had to give 1/10 of the crops every month to the church. But in a world dominated by vampires, I imagine that it would not be the crop, but the blood. So all the commoners, each month they have to go to the church to get their blood drawn, 1/10 of their blood, and everything goes to Versailles to feed the aristocracy. So a lot of details like that I took from history and I translated into a Gothic vampiric version. This was easy for me. The difficult part was trying to control Jeanne, which I think I did not really manage to do. But I was telling you, I'm very glad that Jeanne exists because I feel it's the character I needed for this story. Because the world of Vampyria is a world that is stuck in time. It has been stuck in time for 3 centuries. Nothing changes. The vampires are there. The same vampires rule the world. And I needed a character like a cannonball, destroying everything on her path, a very dynamic character. And she does the job. I think you've read the book. She does the job.
She definitely does the job. She does, yes. So Jeanne was the most difficult, but was she also the most fun to write because she could go into basically any direction? I mean, that must also be fun, right?
Exactly. That's the pleasure, of writing, is when your novels is escaping you and you become the first reader of your novel. You thought you were the creator, but actually you are the first reader. And that's a good sign because it means the novel is becoming alive. It's like a Frankenstein creature. It's coming out of you and it's something of its own. And then it will live with all the readers reading it. So yeah, it was a fun ride, not an easy ride, but a fun ride to be with Jeanne, and especially like her spirit. There are a lot of verbal jousting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Verbal jousting. Yeah.
She's very witty as well.
She's very witty, and at the court, of course, you need muscles, you need reflex to survive, but you also need wits,
yes.
And she has that.
Yes. So, if you were to go to the school of Versailles, what would be your favorite class? Would it be etiquette? Would it be the fighting lessons? What would be your favorite?
Yeah, just to put things in context, I told you that Jeanne's family is murdered in the very first chapters, and her only way to survive is to take the false identity of a noble demoiselle. So she's going to assume the identity of a noble lady in order to go to the court and to maybe to take her revenge, because she wants revenge against the vampire supreme, Louis XIV himself. But before she can access the court, she has to go to the school,
Yes.
where young nobles are trained in order to make a good impression at the court. And several arts are taught there. So there is the art of conversation, the art of good manners, the art of weaponry, like
Yes.
fighting also, fencing,
Yeah.
and equestrian arts, like horse riding. And I have to say I'm a keen horse rider. I love horses.
Really?
So I put that in the novel, and that this is the one probably I would like to take. Yeah.
Nice, nice. All right, so
Do we have horse riders here too? Yes?
we have a few,
yeah.
yes.
A little bit. Like pony riders, maybe.
All right, so last question for me, and then we can maybe take some questions from the audience. But what is your favorite part of the Dutch beautiful limited edition? What's your favorite?
Well, impossible to pick.
course.
What's not to like? You know, it's wonderful.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, well, I saw pictures online before, but seeing the real things, it's even better. And most of all, it's very true to the Baroque spirit, to the Baroque age. This book could be in Versailles Library for sure, because you have all the Baroque ornaments, the golden theme. It looks like the gates of Versailles. You know this mask? It's actually the mask of Apollo, the sun god. So of course, Louis XIV, being very modest, he compared himself to Apollo.
So modest.
Yeah. So if you visit Versailles, you will see this mask everywhere, on the gates, above every door, on all the paintings. This is just a vampiric version of it with a little teeth.
Yes.
And here, it really looks like a golden gate, a gilded gate of Versailles. And that's what a cover is. A cover is a gate to a story. And that's the most magnificent cover to my story. So thank you for the Dutch edition to make that.
You're welcome. It's so gorgeous. All right. Are there any questions from the audience? I will... Yes.
Yes.
I will walk over there. I'm coming.
A very little question, petite question, but I will do it in English. The title, the French title is Cours des Ténèbres. Is that a reference to Heart of Darkness of Conrad?
It is not. The French title is Cours des Ténèbres, and there is a Conrad book which is called Le Cœur des Ténèbres, Heart of Darkness. So it's not a reference, and actually the translation in English, because the book is going to be out in the US in September. They wanted to do it just before Halloween, you know, with the theme, and they translate it not Court of Darkness, but Court of Shadows. So yeah, so there are several ways to translate it. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? At the back? Oh, wait. I'll go here first. I'll be right to you, yeah? Okay.
I was wondering, was it difficult to write Jean in terms of gender? Because there are gender maybe differences between you and your character. How was that process?
Actually, for me, it's easier. And most of my books, I have female heroines, protagonists, main characters. Not always, but in most cases. And as I was telling before, for me, characters are the most intuitive part of writing. I don't think about it too much. It comes like an instinct. But if I try to rationalize it after, I think the fact of writing a character that is different from me, it forces me to be even more focused on my story. Like to forget who I am in the real life and to become the character, to become totally immersed in the story. That's one reason. Maybe there are others, but that's the one that comes to mind.
Who was it? Oh, right there. You?
Yes. Hi, Victor. I have a question for you. As a writer, to another writer, I'm writing a historical, mythical, young adult fantasy. Do you have any advice for young writers?
Well, it's difficult to give advice because there are as many ways to write as there are writers. Then it would depend on your difficulties or not. I could try to give you some more specialized or customized advice. But maybe there are two rules, I think, that are universal to all novelists. Maybe not true for poetry or short stories, but for the novel, I think it's true. The first rule is the regularity and discipline. I think when you want to write a novel, you have to write a bit every day, ideally, or every week, in order to keep connected to your characters, to your story. Because the very act of writing is a fight against reality. There is always something in the real world that seems more urgent than writing, you know. So you have to impose fiction. You have to make this time sacred for writing so that you have the rendezvous, the meeting with your story and your characters every day. And that's how at the end you can put the final word and finish the manuscript. That's the first rule. There is another one. It's the first draft. You don't have to be too perfectionist with the first draft of your story. A lot of people who want to write, they never go to the end of their manuscript because they are too perfectionists at the first draft stage. So they want every sentence to sound perfect. And of course, it's very discouraging, so they stop. You have to tell yourself that the first draft, it's only a first draft. It's a raw material that you're going to rewrite, to edit, in order to create the story. And the actual writing, it happens at the rewriting phase. If you have this idea in mind, it's wonderful because you won't have so much pressure on yourself. The writing will flow much faster, and you will be able to finish the manuscript. You will be in the 10% that will finish the first draft, and then you can rework it, edit it. So these are my two advice.
Oh, yes.
What do you find harder to write, dialogue or action? And how do you tackle the one that you find more difficult if you find yourself in the slump?
I think there is no general rule for me. It depends which type of dialogue and which type of action. If it's a type of action I'm not used to writing, for instance, fighting with a weapon I don't know, I have to do documentation, it has to feel right, so that can be quite challenging. And same on the dialogue, if I don't know my characters enough at the beginning of the novel, maybe I don't know them well enough, so the dialogues won't sound right, but precisely because it's the first draft, I can rework that at the end of the manuscript, where I spend the whole story with them. So now I know them, and I rewrite the dialogues because I know the personality. So there is no typical answer for me. It really depends on the context.
All right. Thank you so much. We have to, unfortunately, not take any questions anymore because you are going to have to, sign a bunch of books. Okay. But
with pleasure.
Before you start that, I am going to announce the winner of the costume contest. And we have this beautiful book bouquet. Careful, careful. Yes. Kan je me nog even vasthouden voor me? Ja? Ja. Heel mooi. Goed. Oké. Nou... 2 van mijn collega's hebben namelijk iemand gespot in het publiek die er wel heel erg mooi uitzag. En dat is Danielle. Ja. Applausje. Ziet er echt geweldig uit. Bloedheet. Letterlijk en figuurlijk. Kijk nou eens jongens, hoe geweldig ze eruit ziet. Echt zo mooi. Dat hoort bij jouw outfit. Dus we hebben voor jou een prachtige boekenboeket. Hou hem goed vast, ja. Hij is niet heel stabiel, maar ja, meer hier aan de bovenkant vasthouden. Dus een applausje voor Danielle en een applausje voor Victor, of course. He's gonna sign your books. So, yes, thank you so much. Thank you.